For all your medication and narcotic tracking needs, check out the LogRX app, created by career fire and EMS professionals. That's LogRX.com.
This podcast is brought to you by Flex 7 from TenCate Protective Fabrics. Flexible, comfortable, and powered with the strength of enforced technology. Flex 7 outer shell fabric is made to move. To learn more, visit tencatefabrics.com/Flex7.
Where you also have it by us, like on the island, we got a lot of these big like mansions that are off the street with the long driveway, so for them, they're either going to be setting up outside and stretching in, or they're going to be they might drop the 5-inch or whatever they have out on the street and just drive in and start operating on tank water and have the second due pick up their length that's there and find a hydrant.
Hello and welcome to this month's Talking Tactics. I'm one of your hosts, or today half of your host, Dave Polikoff, along with RJ. RJ, how you doing today?
What's up, bro?
Doing good, man. So Sam is on assignment, aka on vacation. I think he's taken like 15 vacations since we've been doing this.
He's been on the move this summer.
But good for him. So him out refreshing and getting some relaxation. I figured we would take another dip into the tactical world of apparatus, and we're going to talk about engine work today. And the cool thing is that even though I'm a truck guy at heart, I know RJ is a rescue squad guy at heart or a special service guy. And then, the engine just kind of happens. Being on the detail trail as a lieutenant, you get front seat of a bunch of engine companies. And in my volunteer house, I get to ride the engine every now and then. But I want to dig into a little bit. It's half of the backbone of the fire service, and I've said it 1,000 times. The engine and the truck are like a baseball team, or the baseball pitcher and the catcher. They call it the battery, and I've said that 100 times. But the engine and the truck working together is basically sets the tone for the fire ground. But we all know if that first line doesn't get into place and get water on the fire, it doesn't matter how many truck companies, how skilled everybody is on the fire ground, you're going to fail. So getting that first line in place is key. And I want to talk a little bit about hose packs that we see in the country, lengths of lines. We'll talk a little bit about long lines and different types of lines. Want to talk a little bit about deploying and where we're deploying and how, and get into some tactical considerations for the different structures that we see out there, like houses and guard departments, townhouses, row houses, high rises, and whatnot. So not rambling on anymore. Let's talk a little bit about attack lines, RJ. What are some of the things that you're seeing out there? And you and I, we travel all over the country, at least this side of the Mississippi. Sometimes you dip over on the other side, going over to Missouri and whatnot. But what are some of the things that you're seeing on engine companies, attack line wise, that or you may just look at that and go, oh, never thought about that concept, or we don't do that here in the Mid-Atlantic area. What are some of the things that you're seeing that is pretty interesting and how they working out for people?
So it's kind of funny, man. You know how I am. I'm not a big engine guy. However, I've been forced over the last 3.5, 4 years to get back into the basics of the fire service, which is cool because I realize there's a lot of stuff that I've forgotten, being assigned to a squad for the last 8 years prior to getting promoted. But getting back into the basics, there's a lot of cool things that I've seen. And I think one of the biggest things is how we set the lines up for deployment based off of staffing. So a lot of times, when I first joined the volunteer fire ranks here in Maryland, we were always teaching people to be able to pull the line by yourself. So every line was always set up to be pulled by yourself. You had no help. You had to chase the kinks. You had to do everything by yourself, right? And a lot of these packs were designed, or these loads were designed for that, right? One person to be able to deploy it. And now one of the biggest things I'm seeing is how do we set up lines for 2 people to pull, all right? And then how we're deploying these lines with 2 people. I'm not gonna bullshit you. I don't know every kind of hose, load and pack and all these names. It's gotten so far away from what it used to be. But I think the biggest thing is being able to setting your team up for being able to be successful, stretching the line off the apparatus quickly into the target, right? I think that's, when it comes down to it, we have to take a look at what works best. Not everything that works in this first do is going to be good for this company over here and that first do. Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that kind of building off what you said, what does your area look like as well? What's your staffing? But the biggest thing is, what is your area? Does it make sense to have, very long lines when everything that you run in your first, second, third do area is either row houses or small houses that are right on the roads with hydrants every 300 or 400 feet? That might dictate how you're going to pack your lines. One of my volunteer companies that I'm a life member at, exclusively we use bumper lines on the apparatus, 150 feet of inch. It was 1.5 inches, 1 3/4, and we could get right, nose in, engine in the front, tower in the front, nose into each other, or leave room for each other, but still be able to pull that bumper line right off the front, right to the front door, and be able to cover the basement, first and second floor of these smaller houses, or even smaller townhouses. So I think, what's your first due area look like? If you don't have high rises in your first due area, or any area that you're going to run, does that mean you don't have a high rise pack? Yeah, you're going to have a high rise pack, but it might not be right on the side of the fire engine. It might be in a compartment or something like that. So you're going to want to make sure that you build your lines out for your first due area, build your lines out, like you said, for the staffing that you have. You only got 3 people, that officer's probably going to either making his way to the door, or maybe doing a circle check. So you're going to have to be able to pull that line with that driver, clearing up whatever kinks or anything like that are out there. So I think what you said is key, is, you got to know your people, know your manpower, know your first due area, and then what your engine capabilities are.
I think that one of the important things to talk about, Dave, and I don't know if this is going backwards or not, but there's no way you can know every area, right? There's no way you can know every spot in your area. But the majority of your area, just having some general kind of idea of like what the setbacks are common for most neighborhoods, right? And so everybody understands what a setback is. The setback is the distance from the side of the fire truck to the front door. So that distance that you are in between, the distance in between in that space, right? So there's no way you can know every spot in your area or whatever. But one of the most important things I think we definitely have to talk about is how we can find out how much hose we need for the stretch, right? And one of the biggest things is it is 100% on the officer to be able to make the call on what length hose they want to take to the target. But I'm even going to go a step further and say that it should not 100% rely solely on the officer. I think that we do a pretty good job teaching our backstep guys to be able to calculate that stretch just as much as the engine officer. And I think that we need to do more talking about that in the fire service, of how to teach the backstep guy to understand what the front seat guy is looking at, right? And so when that happens, that's one less thing that the officer has to worry about, knowing that that guy in the back is capable of reading the same thing that the officer up front is reading, right? And so I like to tell people one of the basic things is understanding how to estimate a stretch. All right, I'm not the most engine savvy guy, but I like to keep it in very simple terms and basic terms so I could understand it for myself, right? I'm sure there's better formulas. I'm sure there's better ways, and I'm sure some engine guys who ride engines on a regular could probably have way, way better formulas than what I have. But I like to keep it pretty simple, right? And my formula that I use as a backstep guy prior to even becoming an officer, right, which was 50 feet per floor, 10 to 12 for your stairs, plus your setback, right? If we think about it, and I always like to picture this in my head. If I stood on the corner of the house or the structure, whatever it is, if I stood on the Alpha Bravo corner, and I was to take a 50-foot section of hose and unroll it, just literally take the roll and just stretch it out, would the coupling go past the other corner of the house, or would it fall short of the corner of the house? And that's my indicator of me being able to say, yes, 50 feet would work from this front of the house to the back of the house. Now, let's add in how many floors we're going up, right? So if I'm going to go up from first floor to second floor on a set of residential stairs, well, we know the distance between the floor to ceiling is generally going to be 10 feet. I always like to tack on just a few extra just for good measure. So I like to say somewhere between 10 to 12 feet. So now we have that calculation from the first floor, now the stairwell, and now we're going to be operating on the second floor, right? And so now I add another 50 feet for that. And if it's a 2-story house, right? Now we take the 50 foot for the first floor, the 10 to 12 for the stairs, our 50 foot for the second floor. And now we have an idea of, now we're at 112, let's say 115 feet of hose, plus your setback from the engine. Now, keep in mind, we're always going to be good because we're overshooting a little bit, right? We're not using all 50 feet of hose across the first floor, going up to the second, and then using all 50 foot across the second. So that overshoot puts us in a ballpark to be in a good place. And so I think, again, I'm sure there's way better formulas by better engine people than me, but that's just keeping it very simple for me. And I'll be honest with you, I haven't laid up short yet, and I haven't had myself in a position where I have too much hose in a place either.
And that's key, not coming up short, but definitely not having too much hose. I'd rather have a little bit more than I need, but you don't need a lot more. You're not going to pull a 400-foot line where a 200 is going to, get you where you need to be. Sometimes having too much line is just as bad as coming up short because you might not have the people to manage it, and you're talking kinks and stuff like that. One of the things that I wanted to touch on, we talked about staffing and things like that. I've said this 1,000 times. The busiest person on the fire ground for the first 5 minutes is the engine company, right? So the engine officer, even though we say we get back to basics, think about the things, and I don't have to tell you that, but to the audience, think about the things that the engine officer has to think about coming down the road. And if you're a firefighter and you don't ride the front seat, just talk to your lieutenant or captain. If you're
So Dave cut out, and so one of the things that he was talking about was the things that we do as unit officers in the front seat. So I'll give you guys just a quick rundown of the things that I do as a unit officer in the front seat of the fire truck, starting from the delivery of the bells going off. So my most important thing that I have to do as a unit officer is get in the rig fast. So we like to get in the rig fast so we can get the rig on the street and start the process of water supply, figuring out where we're going and figuring out where the hydrants are going to be so that we can make sure that we have a good understanding of where we're going to be. As a unit officer, I need to make sure that my driver is cool with the directions. I make sure he understands where he's going. And my most important thing is looking up the hydrants to make sure that I can relay that information to the second due company or whoever is going to be picking up my line. Once I establish where my hydrant is and which one I'm gonna pick, I'm relaying that information to my second due company. I'm letting them know that's the plug we're gonna have or we're gonna use. And then I'm starting to go through the process of what I'm gonna do when we arrive, what I'm gonna have the back step guys do. I think it's really, really cool when you have an assigned company and you have the same players all the time, where you train those back step guys to think like you think as an officer. But me as a detail officer, I don't have that luxury to do that. So I always have to make up the game plan with the people in the back as I see it as we arrive. So as we arrive, I have to make up that game plan with the people and make sure they're all on the same page of seeing what I'm seeing.
Yeah.
Now,
go ahead. I'm sorry.
Now, once I got that visual on it, I can give a quick task to the back step guys. Hey, guys, I want you to take a 200 or I want you to take a 300. Here's the place that I want you to take it to, and here's what I want you to do. And then I have to start the officer duties, the on-scene report, the 360, and all of that. So that's a quick rundown of the flow of usually what I do from the time that the bells go off to the time that we arrive. So
Yeah.
Charlie, what's up, man? Welcome.
Hey, how are you?
Charlie has joined the conversation. Charlie, we were just
Charlie joined the conversation, and Dave, you left the conversation.
I know, typical internet stuff. But yeah, Charlie, we were jumping in on we were talked a little bit about engine work, like I told you offline. We talked about the attack lines that some of these crews or companies are carrying and how they're packing them, and we were just going over, how busy the engine company officer is. And a lot of people look at engine company work, that's basic stuff. It may be basic stuff, but it's going to make or break the fire. And how busy that officer is, and nothing I'm not going to tell you. You might have the luxury of having a 5, 6, 7, 8 minute drive to the scene of your first due, where you got the time to look in the map and get a hydrant and give your directions and all that stuff. You're lucky if you get 2 minutes out the door, you're on the scene. And there's a lot of things that have to happen, but you also have the luxury of hopefully having the same guys, so you guys are using that unspoken script that's already out there in your expectations. So talk a little bit about some of the engine work that you're doing with your guys in a much more urban environment. And I'd like to get into estimating the stretch. RJ was just doing that, of how they do it. I know you guys don't carry the pre-connect lines like you see in some of the suburbs and things like that. So let's talk about estimating the stretch, and then some of the things that you're doing as the engine officer.
We have a dead bed, so we can pretty much stretch, we would say, unlimited. We have our on the squad rig, we only have 3 beds. Our supply, which is 3.5, our 2.5, which is about 10 lengths, and then we have our attack, which is 1 3/4, 6 lengths, and then we have 10 lengths underneath there, so we could pretty much stretch down the block wherever we have to go. And if we run out of hose, we just go to the 2.5 bed and we can hook up. I've already had it where we had fires in the projects where you needed 11 lengths. And so pretty much something like that, it's all hands, like all the engines on scene, even the truckies. As you're going up to the fire floor, you're grabbing a length of hose and you're walking it up a couple of flights till you get where you got to go. I actually like that too when we're the squad, because it helps us get in the building as well too, because we help them with the stretch, because they're going to need the extra hands. And then once we get the line in place, we're able to get into work and do what we have to do. And you know how it is, everything depends on getting water on the fire. If we could get that fire out, all the problems go away. I would say the majority of the fires that we go to are usually a 1-line fire. If we get there quick enough, usually we're there within 3 to 5 minutes. So, we can have 4 engines there, 3 engines and 2 trucks in the city. Even in the valleys, we can get out. It's not like we're going that far. And the whole thing we stress, on both sides of the border, if we could get that first line into place quick and start putting water on the fire, it's going to make conditions a lot better. So, until we get that first line stretched, we're not stretching any additional lines. I had a good job, like you were saying, right around the corner from the firehouse last year. It was in like the fall, and we had the top of fire protected MD. It was like a 4 or 5 story, and the whole roof was going with that VFIS paneling that they have on there, and they had a deck up there, and it looked like a plane crashed on the top of the building. It was just all fire. It was spectacular. We met the guys from the truck in the bulkhead, and it was like we were at the fire apartment door. Like, they opened the door and the fire was rolling in at us, and it was like, just, hey, get ready, guys, you're going to open up the line from the door. And I even called the backup line and said, hey, once you see us starting to move in, we're going to go in and go to the right. You guys take everything from the forward in to the left, to the front of the building. And, we're going to need 2 lines. So be ready to stretch once we get our line in position and we start moving. And it was all that coordination that worked out, What I would say as far as stretching, what I try to teach the guys is know your buildings in your area, right? With us, we have a lot of brownstones in frames. So you figure the frontage is about 20 feet, right? So if we have a 50-foot length of hose, which is what we run for each length, I would say, okay, so for every 2 brownstones that we go to, that's 1 length of hose right there. So as you're going down the block or a frame, we know. The other thing you can do, the street lights are usually 100 feet apart. So if it could be 50, could be 100, know your area, and that can help, because then okay, it's 1 length or 2 lengths. Count the street lights as you're going down the block. Whether it's me, the officer, doing it, or the nozzle man or whatever, we have it figured out what we need, and we can figure out what the stretch is. If there's a well hole, that's going to help, because 1 length can go up 5 stories in the well hole, right? If there isn't a well hole, we're going to need a length for each floor going up. So you figure however many stories you're going up, you're going to need at least a length in for each floor that you're going up in the building. So that's going to be important. Know your dimensions of the building. This way when you get to the fire floor, can I do it with 1 length, or am I going to need more than 1 length up there? That's going to be big. And how do we know that? We should know it when we either get the size up, or we look at the ticket, or we just know the buildings in our area when we're responding. I'm sure I'm preaching the same thing that you guys were before I got on.
No, it's so funny because it's so funny.
Some of the stuff
we all think the same.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, it doesn't matter where you are. The fires burn the same. The buildings might be a little different, but the tactics are the same, And you guys, down south where you guys are, you have a lot of the garden apartments, and it's the same thing. It's instead of going vertical, you're going horizontal with the layouts of the building and how far you're going. And the worst part that you got there is you got the lightweight construction now that they're doing, and the non-fireproof. So it's like, you got to get quick water on the fire, or it's going to be an exterior operation, So
one of the things Charlie brought up, and I had it written down to talk about, was how we work to get the line in place, the first line to get the work. Everybody works to get the first line in place. When I was coming up in my younger years, it was always, that's not our job. And, I think once more people started to mature and realize we understand that it's all of our jobs to get the line in place. And we look at this as a team effort. The whole team looks good, and all the companies make up the team. And the whole team benefits, and everybody's much safer, actually, if we have the line in place versus everybody being about their own selves, and we don't worry about getting that line in place. So I like that you brought that up, Charlie, because that was something that I had on here to talk about, and I'm glad you hit that.
I was literally going to say the same thing. I mean, I was getting ready to say, like, hey, man, just because you're on a truck doesn't mean you can't pick up hose line and get up.
Well, you know what Charlie did? Charlie wanted to hit it all real quick
because he's going to get a run.
Because he gets another run, so he can have
exactly.
No, but a lot of the things you said, Charlie, are 100%. With engine company, these guys that are coming in on the truck companies or the rescue squads or even the next two engine company, don't pull a second line if we're having a problem getting that first line in place, because now you're just fighting against each other. I have no problem pairing up, especially if you're going with a 2.5 or something like that, or we're going up in a high rise, or it's a long stretch in a garden. I'm married to engine companies up. We don't have the luxury of having, 4 or 5 people on an engine. I only have 3, which is literally 2, an officer and the firefighter. So I'll marry 2 engine companies up just so I can get that line in place. If you go past a line it's stuck under a tire or going through a door and a coupling stuck, and you're on the truck company, first of all, you're a piece of garbage. But the second thing is what are you going to do? You're not going to pull ceilings. You're not going to ventilate. Got to get the line in place. So I am glad you brought that up, Charlie. I was literally going to say the same thing. One of the things I want to touch on that you said is that, a length of hose per stairwell, or if you have a well hole. So explain to some of the newer people out there, what exactly is a well hole and how do we negotiate that? And then we'll also talk a little bit about flying standpipes or taking hose up from the outside of the building.
Well, the well hole is where you have that little space inside of where the stairs wraps around. If the stairs is next to each other and you don't have anything where you can fit, or if you have to squeeze the hose in there, that's not going to be a good spot, because when it charges, you're going to have a kink, and you're gonna have another problem you're gonna have to deal with. That would be like the hose being under the doorway and you charge it, So if there is an opening in there where you can get the hose up, and you look down and you could see the lobby from whatever floor you're on, and you have space, that's your well hole. And what you can do is you can bring your hose to the bottom of the stairs there, and if you're carrying the fold, you can either stick your fold over in the well hole and like carry it up as you're going around, or you could take and drop your folds there, grab the nozzle, and just hold the nozzle out into the well. And what you're going to do is let the hose just go up the well while you're carrying it there. Then when you get where it is, you looked at you before you went in the building, you saw what kind of a building you had and what your fire area is. Pull that hose up that you need a length, pull it up to the coupling. You need a length and a half, maybe pull it up to the second coupling and flake all of that hose out. And the big thing you're going to need is a hose strap, because once you get that hose up there, we got to strap it down to the railing, so when it charges, it doesn't drop back down to the first floor. And now you guys got to hump all of that hose back up again. You're going to have an issue there, but you could tie it off with a hose strap, and you're good to go. Even if you don't have a hose strap, you got webbing. Take the webbing and girth hitch it, right? Just make a loop, go around and bring your whole piece of webbing through that loop, tighten it down, and then tie it off on the railing. And this way you got something where when the hose charges, it doesn't fall down.
Yeah, and that's important. Carry the webbing or carry some, 8mm prusik cord or something like that. It doesn't have to be this huge, 1/2-inch Kerr-Mantle, but something to tie that off at. And it also comes into play if you're going to have to tie a door back, because the last thing you want is to run a hose line uncharged down a hallway. Door shuts and you charge the line. Now you've kinked that line off. So if you don't have a chock, you can tie that doorknob back. But very important. Keep that rope with you, and using that well hole is the difference between a 50-foot, maybe 100 feet to get to the door on the 5th floor, or 5 lengths of hose and then another 50 to get to the front door. So you definitely your nozzle pressure, not your nozzle pressure, but your friction loss is reduced. Your only thing you're dealing with now is gravity. So let's talk a little bit about hose lines up a building.
Wait, before you do that, I do have something though.
Go ahead.
Also, just remember with your chocks, a lot of times you're going to need 2 chocks just to get in the door, right? You got usually the outside vestibule door, the inside door. That's 2 right there. Then if you go to the stairway and the stairway has a fire door on there, that's a 3rd chock, and we're not even on the fire floor yet. So that's where it's good to have, 6 chocks in your pocket, especially if you're running short where you don't have a lot of people, because 3 chocks are 8 up and you're just at the stairway. Yeah. Now, when you get up there, you need another chock for the stairway door, and hopefully that's it. There's no fire stores in the middle of the hallway if you're trudging down, and then you got your fire apartment doors. So you could see how you can go through chocks really quick. Another thing you could carry, but I wouldn't really recommend it for the initial stretch, you could have nails, because you could fit a lot of nails in your pocket. But the only problem is if it's not set in the door good, somebody comes along and hits it by accident and it closes on the door, and it could be one of our members operating or an occupant leaving the building. So, you definitely need at least 6 chocks.
So right, that sounds like a Capital Fire quick tip in the making here in the near future.
That's Charlie. That's all Charlie. But I will tag on that with Charlie. So when Charlie was talking about chalking the doors open, right? And this is one of those things where this might be a RJ pet peeve coming out, but a lot of people like to carry those spring clamps, and a lot of times those spring clamps, if you don't set them right, will do the same exact thing like a nail, right? So a lot of people only think that you can only chalk a door with the spring clamp by either putting it on the side of the door or by putting it on the hinge, right? And a lot of times if you put it on the hinge, it keeps it a little more secure, but the door still does shut a good majority of the way. And then the other thing is that putting it on the side of the door still shuts all the way. It just only shuts to the to the spring clamp. So a lot of times that's just something to consider. I know a lot of people wearing them on their coats,
Right.
And hanging them off their coats. But sometimes you can actually put them on the racks, the standpipe racks themselves. And then the other thing I wanted to add.
Well, wait, hold on before you do that, RJ. But so where I like to put it with it, because like we'll have it, and even we'll have it even on the can. We'll have it like on where the gauge is. We'll clip it on there, or you could have it on the hook in the truck or whatever. What I like to do is have it on like that middle hinge, and just clip it right in there, because when you clip it in there, the door is going to stay open. It can't close because you got that clamp right on the middle of the door, and it's going to hold it open. And the reason why I say in the middle or even towards the bottom is not bad, because if you do lose the door and you got fire rolling over your head or high heat conditions, at least you can have control of the door.
Yeah, that's something that we talk about quite a bit. In fact, Hank and I had this conversation not too long ago during one of our last trainings. But being able to have your plan of what you're going to put in place to keep the door open. And then one of the things I wanted to add that Charlie brought up was the straps. I know lately a lot of people have been using the Husky straps. The Husky straps have been nice because you can actually wrap them around the bundle. It keeps it nice and tight, but then you can also undo the strap and you can wrap it around the railing. So and then they're not even expensive. They're like $4 from Home Depot. So those are just some different things that you can add to your cache of tools that help with the stretch and getting the hose in place and help to keep it secured in place. Yeah.
I think we've got a couple of quick tips that are be coming up with chocks, and then also do another whole episode of what's in your pocket. And you don't have to have these big honking wooden door chocks. You can smaller ones, and you can keep 3 or 4 in your pocket. And if everybody on the engine company's got 3, and if you're running with a 4-person engine company, that's 12. That's 12 door chocks. So these are some of the things that engine company need to think about, that we want to make sure the doors are secure, the hose line's secure, and that we're working together to get that hose line in place, even if you have to marry a couple of companies up. We had talked a little bit about, before you got on here, Charlie, about different hose lines that are hose loads that we're seeing. One of the more common ones that we see in the Mid-Atlantic area is the Minuteman load. If our readers out there aren't sure what that is, Google it, put it on YouTube, you'll see it. But for one of the cross lays, and if your engine company has cross lays, you're going to see that Minuteman load, whether it be single stack or double stack. And then the whole question is, do you wrap the nozzle or do you not wrap the nozzle? That's the big controversy, but it's like smooth bore or fog, but so we're seeing the cross lays, and it's a good go-to line. We talked a little bit about bumper lines. Depending upon the area that you're in, you got to know your first due area. And one of the things that I want to touch on real quick before we move on to the longer lines is one of the things that you said, Charlie, is, you got to know your first due area. We run a ton of medical calls with the medic units and the ambulance. So that engine company's going out. When you run the medical calls, take a look at the surroundings, especially if you're running garden apartments or type townhouses, or if you got the same type of houses in the neighborhood or your brownstones or whatever. Take a look at them. What do they look like? How many stairs is it to get up to the top floor? What's the layout of the apartment itself? How big is it? Can you hit it with 50 feet, or do you need 100 feet? Take advantage of those times when the building's not on fire to kind of know what the layout of the building is. And like I said, we run a ton of medical calls, so there's no excuse not to know what these areas look like. So just take the time to take a look, and it's going to pay dividends at 3:00 in the morning when it is on fire.
We have a lot of like renovations in the brownstones around here and the row frames. And what they like to do is they like to put that duplex down apartment in from the first floor into the cellar. And they put that circular staircase in, and we go on like the EMS runs. And I'm saying to the guys, we could just about go down this stairway now, and all we have on is a pair of bunker pants. Imagine if we gotta have our turnout coat and a mask on here, and we're trying to advance the line down to get to the cellar, and that's not going to be fun, And so it is big to have a layout of your building so you know what you're going to encounter. It's nice to be able to see it in light than when it's lights out and now you're trying to figure out, hey, what's going on, you know?
Mm. So let's talk a little bit about some long lines, RJ. I see they're getting more and more popular on the apparatus, these pre-connected long lines, or even if you have to build one. I have to say, I ran a house fire last year in Frederick, and the third due engine company came in from the street behind the actual house was on fire. And then dudes pulled that long line between two houses and was right there at the backyard with 100 feet left over, ready to go to the floor above if they had to. And I'm like, that to me, I wish I'd have taken some pictures of that. But what are you doing? What are you looking at when you're pulling long lines, and what's too long when we're talking about pre-connect, RJ?
Yeah, so it's funny because I think I covered this right when your internet zonked out.
Probably.
But being able to estimate the stretch, right? I think the biggest thing is being able to estimate how much hose you need, being able to calculate where you got to go with it, how much you need, and how many people you have to help move it. One of the biggest things I like to think about is once I calculate how much hose I need, how much hose is going to be left over, right? Because a lot of that hose that's left over has got to be somewhere. And the last thing you want is to hamper it all in a hallway or a stairwell or something like that. Not making it hard for guys and girls to get up the stairs and down the stairs, that kind of stuff. So we do, I think for most companies, the longest line is the 300 that we can build out to a 5. So the most people, they generally call it the apartment line. And that's the line that we use for like our garden apartments, the apartment buildings, that kind of stuff. I got to honestly say the only way you know if it works is to go out and actually stretch it into areas and see how far you can go with it to know how much you can do with it and if you need to build out from that. So one of the common ways we transport that line is with a 3-person crew. The backstep fireman and nozzleman will take the first section and the officer will take the second section, or the driver will take the second section, and the two of them will take it to the target. If the backstep guy and the driver take those 2 sections, then the officer will take the rack, and then now we have another section coming with us. So now we're taking that 300 and building that into a 400 per se. Another way people do it is they'll take the 300, and then the driver will stretch the 200-foot crosslay. This 200-foot crosslay will go first, and then that goes out, and then the nozzle breaks away, and then they can attach a bundle or another section to that 200 to build out a 300. I'm sorry, build out a 400. So there's many different ways that people do it. And, as a detail boss, I'm covering at all of these different companies. Everybody does it some way different. And unless it's pretty egregious, I generally go with the flow. For me, the biggest thing is to know what they're going to do and what the driver is going to do, because I need to know where I fall into the mix. I either need to take hose with me or they got it under control. One of the biggest things is now most apartments are transitioning to 4-person staffing. So now with having 4-person staffing, now it's a matter of who's taking the lines, usually with the officer being the last one who has to take hose. So now you have your nozzleman and you're dedicated or assigned nozzleman, and you're dedicated or assigned backup person. And the backup person ultimately chases the kinks, helps to flake out for our pre-connected lines, chases the kinks for the 200. Again, some places do it differently. In the rural companies of where we work, that backstep guy chases the kinks and takes care of the forcible entry because of the fact of your special services coming from a distance. So all of those different ways play out with some of those longer lines. Is that, you know what I'm saying?
Yeah. Now, one of the things that I want to touch on, you had talked about you could build it out to 500. And I know some older school engine drivers, they're cringing when they're hearing these long lines. Back in the day when I learned pumps, when I first took my pump class, I said, if you're pumping a line more than 200 psi, then something's wrong. But I tell people, I said, you got to get into what kind of pump do you have on your fire engine. Most of these fire engines are 1,500, 2,000 gallon per minute pumps. So to pump a 220 psi through a line, that engine's kind of still idling. So you're not cavitating or anything like that. You're not running away with it. So understand that just because we say 500 feet through 1.75 inches, yeah, your pump pressures might be high, but that engine can maintain that because of the amount of pressures that those new pumps can draw. So don't let that throw a wrench into what you're doing. It all depends on what your area is. And then the one thing that you talked about, RJ, you talked about the pre-connected long lines. One of the things that I wanted to touch on, you said your apartment load is leader lines, where you have it either a 2.5 or a 3-inch line with a gated Y on it that's pre-connected, maybe 200 feet, maybe 250 feet. You deploy that, maybe that's packed like a Minuteman, and then you can put your apartment load, which is another 200 feet on top of that. And you can build that out to 500, 550, 600, especially if you're using 3-inch hose, because the friction loss in that is pretty low based on, the size of the hose. And then as you're building off of that. So it's not uncommon to see, guys running these long lines. And you touched on it a little bit too, Charlie, from a block away. I've seen, guys in Baltimore City, they're running their long, in DC, running that long line to the Charlie side from almost a half a block and still having enough line to get to the back and generate the pump pressures. Go ahead, Charlie.
Well, what we can do too is we can stop in front of the building and have the guys pull off the lengths that they think they need to go from the street up to the fire floor. And then the chauffeur can drive down the block and go to the hydrant. And with our dead beds that we have, they got plenty of hose right there. And, they can just take and hook up and they're good to go. Because, or even in the city, sometimes the hydrants are spread out. So you got a little ways to go. I know that's a big tactic that they'll do in like the Bronx and Harlem, and that they'll stop in front of the building because they got the room and the truck can still get in place, drop the guys off. They'll pull what they need. And then the chauffeur will just drive to the hydrant and hook up. And, by the time he checks the hydrant and hooks up, they're getting ready to call for water. And so it works pretty good that way too. And, you could do the same thing, stop at the driveway, pull off what you need, and then have the chauffeur take off to find a hydrant if you got, you got the length of hose on your rig. And I was telling the guys, the nice thing about that is, how many people do you really need to break the hose, hook up to the rig, and then, hook the rig up to the hydrant, right? So while he's doing that, the rest of the crew can be stretching. And by the time they get to where they got to go, get everything flaked out and all, they're ready for the line,
We had one of my volunteer company in Prince George's County. We used to call that the hurt feelings line, because that engine would pull up at the second due, and they drop that bundle right in front, and they reverse lay back to the hydrant, pick up the hydrant for the first due. So we'd have 2 lines in the front. And if you were good getting that line in place and getting it charged, you could hurt some feelings.
Yeah, well, that's the whole thing. Hurt. Like, we would do that too. If we'll pull off for the second due, it would be the third due probably, or the second due if we're already, going to be in position. And you could drop that other line if you have, like on the other engines, they have the double dead bed like that. So you can pull off the lengths that you need and go. And now you leave the whole front of the building open for the truck and they're good. I was going to say something, but I lost my train of thought. Where you also have it by us, like on the island, we got a lot of these big like mansions that are off the street with the long driveway, so for them, they're either going to be setting up outside and stretching in, or they're going to be they might drop the 5-inch or whatever they have out on the street and just drive in and start operating on tank water and have the second due pick up their length that's there and find a hydrant,
Yeah, that's common. And where RJ and I work, I mean, and even where I volunteer, where you got these houses that may sit, a couple thousand feet off the road, and you got to make that. Am I going in dry? The next company's going to lay in for me. I got a tankers coming in. So yeah, that another reason why that engine officer is like, especially if it's a rural assignment, that guy's got so much stuff going on that they've got to make sure that they've got the water supply, second water supply. Am I laying out going in? I've got to coordinate all that, because I could have the best crew in the world, get the line in place, but if you ain't sending me water, we're going to lose. So I want to talk a little bit about lines going through doors. I see a lot of issues, especially as a command officer, where everybody wants to go in through the same opening, and it gets to a point where you can only send so many hose lines in before the hose lines aren't moving anymore. So as a rule, Charlie, how many lines are going in through one opening in your work?
Two, and then the third one has to go, an exterior stretch, another stairway, rope stretch, but 2 up, 1 stairway, no more than that. Yeah. Because if you have more than 2, you're not getting anywhere. Just to have 2 can be a nightmare, especially where you could have the problem is if all the units aren't on the same page. The first wants to stretch their line and the second wants to stretch their line, and you got to stretch. You're not going to be able to get 2 lines in place at the same time. It's just going to be a mess.
Yeah, we run into that issue where you'll get, you have a decent fire going, you got the first line going, that second line is going to go and back them up. Now I got to get a line above the floor. And if that chief doesn't catch it right away, that whole tunnel vision, the third line's going in, and we're going to try and get it up the stairway to the floor above, as opposed to, a rope stretch or find a back stairwell, or maybe come in from the basement and work your way up or whatever. How about you, RJ? What are you looking at as a rule of thumb as an engine boss, lines going through any one opening?
I try to process. Well, for the most part, the good thing is that our policy drives that, which makes it a little easier for us. Your first due company, your second due company, and your first due truck all have the front side, and your third due, fourth due, and second truck all have the back side. So that kind of makes it a little easier for us because the rigs are already in position to be able to stretch. Now, obviously, you have those variables where you might have the first line go around to the rear, and now you got to flip flop, and the rear units have to come to the front, whatever. But I try to process that on the way there too. Like I'm trying to figure out where those companies are going to be going and what they're taking with them. And then one of the biggest things you got to make sure is to make sure you don't have a bigger line on top of a smaller line, which that also can hamper the first due company getting their line in place. I have seen companies make that mistake where they take 1.5 inches or 1.75 inches, and the second one that comes off by accident is a 2-inch line. And so just keeping and for us, you get a young or newer person, we have the cross lays. You have 3 stacks of cross lays. 2 of them are usually 1.75 inches or 1.5 inches, and one's 2-inch. So, you at the quick look of it, the 2-inch can look like 1.75 inches, you know what I mean? And so
especially when you're excited.
Huh?
Especially when you're excited.
Yeah, especially when you're excited. I'll be lying to you if I tell you I didn't make that mistake in younger years, you know what I mean?
We get a lot of people who don't realize how much fire you can put out with 1 3/4 inches.
Absolutely.
And with us, I find it a lot of times more in the volleys than at work, because at work it's pretty much, unless it's a MD or if it's an MD where we can have it, where it's 1 3/4 inches, what you're stretching, and it's 1 3/4 inches. But where we'll have the problem is a lot of times they see fire on multiple floors and they say, oh, big fire, big water, but they forget that 1 3/4 inches can put out almost just as much fire, but within reason. You can put out a lot of fire with the 1 3/4 inches, and it's a lot more maneuverable. And that's the whole thing. If you got to hit multiple rooms and it's a non-fireproof or somewhere you want to get in and do some damage, you got to stretch that 1 3/4 inches. You stretch the 2.5, and I call the 2.5 the anaconda. All you're going to be doing is fighting that thing.
Yeah.
And if they're pumping, at least with the 1 3/4 inches, if they're pumping a little high, we can still handle it. But with the 2.5, if they pump a little high, that thing's like a 4x4, and now you got to try and bend it where you got to go, and you're just dead in the water, and that's just adding to the problem.
Yeah.
And, we don't need any. I had one of my first fires, standpipe job at work. The control, it was a new guy. He just opened up the gate, didn't check the gauge, and trying to make the bend to get in the fire apartment. It was like I had a 4x4 and I was trying to bend it,
Navigate through tight turn.
Oh yeah, it was a nightmare. And in the private dwellings, it's just, it's a mess. You take a beating for what,
Yeah.
And you hit the nail on the head, especially with the hose lines nowadays with the synthetic material. We went back to 1.5 inch in Montgomery County when I was there because we did the work. But an 1.75 inch attack line with a low pressure fog nozzle or even smooth bore, you can push 250 gallons a minute out of that thing and still manage it. And not have to worry about over pumping or anything like that. I mean, what are you going to get out of a 2.5, 300, right?
Yeah.
Your storefront fire, whatever. Yeah. Maybe you're going to get that 2.5 and sweep it down. And when that thing's knocked, finish it up with 1.75 inch. But like I said, we did the numbers in Montgomery when I was there and 1.5 inch. We were getting 150 gallons a minute out of 1.5 inch all day long. And then the backup to that was 2 inch, so we could get 250 out of that easily. So the new nozzles that are out on the market, the newer nozzles, they're built better. They're engineered better. The hose lines that's out there with the synthetic material and the way the inner linings are. I mean, do your research. You'll be surprised what you can get away with. But yeah, don't just look at it and go, oh, big fire. I'm going to have to pull, a 2.5 and throwing 300 gallons a minute with 2 dudes. Unless those dudes are bench pressing Volkswagens for PT, it's going to be very difficult to get that thing where it needs to be.
We changed our procedure in the FDNY. It used to be like, how you would see like the bodega with the apartments above, and they used to want you to stretch like a 2.5. And now they changed it to it's 1.75 inch if conditions verify it. Because it's like you could have a good bodega going, but you make a good push with the 1.75 inch and you're going to knock it out quick, as opposed to the 2.5. Or the one that used to get me would be when we would have like a dryer fire where it's the contents in the dryer and you got a good smoke condition, and maybe you even have it's up in the vent work and it's going up in the ceiling, and we got to stretch to 2.5, and it's like you're battling with the anaconda when you could just march right in there with the 1.75 inch, knock it down, then get behind where all the control area is and just hit it down real quick. And you'd be able to stretch real quick, and have it out, as opposed to the 2.5 where you're taking a beating for what?
Well, when you're riding the truck and you go in with a can and you push the guys out of the way and knock it with the can and then piss everyone off. So we're coming down towards the end, but I do want to talk about the different structures that were out there and then how we're doing that. And we touched on that a little bit. Our typical fire that we run in America, the house fire, single family, knowing your area. Typically, those fires can be dealt with an 1.75 inch line, 150, 200 gallons a minute, even if you've got a lot of fire that's coming out of there. But moving more in towards the multifamily, with your garden apartments, and then we'll finish it up with high rises. We have a ton of garden apartments in the mid-Atlantic area, and a lot of them, I'd say 90% of them are that newer construction or that post Vietnam era where you're running truss construction, 2x4s, flammable exteriors, things like that. I know you're starting to see some of that at the FDNY because they are building new stuff there. What are you noticing with that when you're burning those up, and how are you handling those fires, and how fast are they moving, and where do you, as a boss, because in your volley company you were a boss for a long time, you were a chief, you're a boss still.
Oh yeah.
Where are we calling for these hose lines in these garden apartments? Obviously the fire floor. Where are you looking for your next units to go?
Well, pretty much we're doing it. We're stretching 1.75 inch in our garden apartments. And you're going to have a line on the fire floor. You're going to have a line on the floor above. If it's the top floor, you're going to have a line in the fire apartment minimum, a line in the adjoining, because it's going to be up in that cockloft, and we're going to try and knock it down before we have to worry about a collapse. That's pretty much what we're doing. As far as calling for the line, I would say, when we know the address we're going to, talk it up in the rig as we're going there. Make sure everybody's on the same page. Hey, when we stop, RJ, we're going to take 1.75 inch, all right? And just check. Or if we're going to do something different, maybe it's fully involved or that, and you're going to need a 2.5. Usually we just use the 1.75 inch, but if you're going to deviate, you got to make sure everybody's on the same page and they know. I know what I wanted to get back to. The whole problem that you have is with this flammable exterior and all, even in the private dwellings, everybody's yelling fully involved. And it's like what I tell my nozzle man firefighter, because it doesn't have to be just male and female. I tell the nozzle firefighter, it looks spectacular. It looks like it's fully involved. Before we go through the door, just take that line and sweep it across the gable on the top and let all of that water cascade down in the front of the building. And what we're going to do is the chief that's panicking, because where he is, he looks like it's fully involved, or whoever the IC is, we're going to knock all of that exterior fire down real quick. And then we're going to go inside, and before we even go inside, we're going to knock all of that down, and we're going to see maybe it's a room on the first floor and maybe another room on the second floor that it got past the window frame.
And that's important, Charlie, because, the people that are listening to this and watching this podcast understand the FDNY is doing the same thing. It is not a coward move to sweep that exterior real quick, knock that exterior fire. You'll find that 90% of it was the vinyl siding and you had a room off. Knock it down and then go in and finish the job. It's not like you're parked out in the front yard and putting the fire out from the outside. And tell the chief, calm down. We got a little bit of fire on the outside and we're getting ready to go in. It's important that we get to that. And we preach that where we work at too, RJ. And I know we don't have high rises where we work at, RJ, but we do have high rises where I used to work and where you volunteer. So let's talk a little bit about high rises. What are some of the challenges? Go ahead, Charlie.
I just got one other thing too, like the private dwellings. A lot of times what happens is with the vinyl siding, say it's blowing out one of the sides, right? And you got the house next door that's steaming. Take 5 minutes and just go over there, open up the line, sweep it from side to side on the siding. Let all of that water get down there and cool it down. Now we're going to give it a little bit of time for the other units coming in. And, hey, if something shows, they're going to have that building. But we're going to go into our building. And another problem that we have, too, especially with the row frame buildings that we deal with, is a lot of times the rear. If nobody gives us a good report on the rear, what I find that we need with those buildings is if we have a fire in the rear and it's out the windows in the siding on the rear, what happens is it extends across the rear and nobody sees it because everybody's in front of the building. And what you really need to do is, we had a job where it was on the first floor. We went in, we knocked down our room, and we saw the fire was on the outside of the building. It was a whole bunch they renovated the building, and there was all the construction side material in the backyard that was on fire. And I mean, it was like a 4-foot high by 20-foot pile that was burning back there. That was probably like the original fire, and it burnt into the first floor. And I had my nozzleman go out the back door, and all we did was turn around, and the whole back of the building, you could see the V where it was burning up. And we hit the pile real quick. And actually, we didn't even hit the pile. We took, and they have that Yankee gutter in the rear, the gutter that runs along the rear. I said, just sweep the gutter, let the water wash down. And no joke, the chief was calling it a second alarm because the roof looked over and said that he had it out a couple of windows, but what it was window frames. When we sweep that and we knocked it down, all it ended up being was 2 window frames on like the second and third floor, and the pile that we were putting out, and the first floor like kitchen area where it burnt in. And if we didn't do that, and if we would have stayed inside, we probably would have lost the whole block. It would have been like going to both exposures, and it would have been just running until I joke around and I say the Brooklyn fire stops, which would be the cross streets, because they can't burn anything. Or the vacant lot,
And that's important. We talk about, the chiefs, seeing what they're seeing. As a chief officer, all I ask, just give me some information. So that little bit of communication, hey, chief, we got some exterior stuff going on. It looks more spectacular than it is. We'll have it taken care of here in a minute.
You got to make them feel comfortable with what they're seeing, man.
Yeah,
I told a dude one time, he's probably listening, Donovan. I told him one time we had a fire. I told him to get up on the second floor, work that line around that entire floor. And I said, every once in a while, make sure that stream goes out the front side of the building. Yep. Make sure everybody gets wet so they know that line's moving. That's the most important thing, that the line is actually moving. right? And not too long ago, we had a fire 2 weeks ago. And I told the girl on the back step, I said, as we're pulling up, I said, do you see the streams shooting out of the top? That means the line is actually moving. That means people are moving with the line. Those are good things.
And
When
the
people,
smoke,
yeah,
turning
smoke,
white,
right? When people see the
gray,
smoke changing, when people see the smoke changing, when people see the streams moving and shooting, that puts a chief at ease a little bit.
Yeah, that's what you want to see.
Yeah.
Yep.
Or you know where it's good too, when you say, hey Donovan, we got all fire knocked down, and he says, no you don't, RJ, you got one more room towards the front of the building, it's blowing out there square, and now you know, hey, we got to go down one more.
Go down.
We got it, you know.
A little bit of communication goes a long way, and it keeps Keith from being nervous. So let's finish this off, RJ and Charlie. We'll talk a little bit about high rise. What are some of the challenges that you've seen, RJ, when you face, in Rockville and running into Bethesda and whatnot? We've got decent sized buildings, doesn't compare to Manhattan skyline, but what are some of the challenges that you've seen, and maybe some tricks that you've learned along the way to help people that are encountering these and to get that line in place?
So it's crazy, man. I haven't been on a ton of high-rise fires. I've been on, I would say, 3 or 4 really good high-rise fires that required everybody to be working and moving. But one of the biggest things is being able to get the line in place and to actually be able to work it. A lot of times, the biggest thing is getting to the spot. Right. And if you're the first new company, you can have the luxury of taking the elevator up to a couple floors below. And then, hopefully getting the elevator back down to the rest of the companies. But the other thing is, if you're not, you got to hike it. It is what it is. I think that's one of the things that I always make that determination when I'm eating dinner. If it goes down tonight, am I going to be able to hump all these floors up there,
Well, what you have to realize, RJ, you got to get in that elevator before they start flowing water, because once that water gets in the shaft, you don't have an elevator anymore, and now you got to do the.
You got no choice. You got no choice. But yeah, being able to operate, man. One of the biggest things. I had a fire one time. It was first due, literally, the old Social Security Administration building, literally a block from the firehouse. The elevators were out of service. We had to hump the whole thing. And then the shitty part is being able to operate once you get up there. It never fails. The guys are tired. They're winded. You know what I mean? And now you got to put the lines in place, and you actually have to hook up and do everything. It's funny. I make the joke, but I'm still 100% accurate. I have not seen it fail yet. I always find more tools in the stairwell the higher you go. So every time you go up, the higher you go, the more tools you keep finding, because people realize, well, I really don't need this flat head axe, and I'm not going to use it, so I'll drop this now, and I'll use another tool when I get up higher. But never fails. The higher you go, the more tools you'll find. So, yeah, I think that's one of the biggest challenges is being able to get to the floor, being able to get your lines hooked up, and then to be able to operate it, because most of the times the crews are actually tired getting up there and the work that you have to do. Again, that's another one of those times where it's really important to make sure that everybody's working to get the line in place and down the floor. One of the other things,
you got to pace yourself pretty much. You got to pace yourself.
You do.
That's
the biggest thing. That's the biggest thing.
Even if you're a marathon runner or in shape, it affects all of us the same way. Those stairs are the equalizer. And once you get up there, like you said, yeah, maybe we're going to get all the equipment up there and start hooking up. And maybe we're not going to be the people that are going to get water on the fire. But at least if we can get control of the door and get the line stretched to the door and charged, you know what? We did our job. It's
a team mentality, But one other thing that I do think about as a unit officer is where I want to hook up. Not all the time will I hook up on the floor below. Sometimes I will hook up on the floor, depending on how far down the hallway we have to go to the actual unit. I will sometimes hook up on the floor of, and it's better because it saves us hose in the long run. So those are just some of my things. Charlie, what about you?
With us, we have to hook up to the floor below. And then what happens too is, like, if we have the scissor stairs where, the stairs are next to each other, the two separate stairs. And what happens is where the standpipe goes down, it's in every other stair. So you might not be hooking on the floor below. You might be 2 below initially if you go pick the wrong stairway. And what you can do is you can cheat a little and go down to the floor below, open the door, and go around and hook up to the other stairwell. But you just got to take into consideration, if it's a good smoke condition and it's meeting you on the floor below, do you want to put all of those people on that floor in jeopardy? Now, you have to deal with that. But yeah, you're going to have options. But, we don't hook up on the fire floor,
Yeah. We've had it a couple of times where it's worked for us just because of the length of the hallway. Especially with minimal staff.
With you guys, that makes sense for you. For us, it's not that big of a deal because if we need a couple more lengths, we have the 2 engine companies hooked up. So the second due is going to have their folds too. So between both companies, we're going to have guys with hose. So we, firefighters with hose. So we don't have to worry. We're going to have hose. So whatever works for you, that's what you're going to do, and, like I said, get one line in operation. And then if we need a backup, the backup's going to have to go below the hookup below that. But right now we want to get that first line into operation so that we can get water. A lot of times it's a 1-line fire, but if it does, you have extension on the floor above, then, we got to get a line up there too. And we got to hook up below. So, you could get a lot of lines in operation. And you might even have to, on a case like that, you might have to do an exterior stretch if you have multiple lines too, because you might not have enough outlets to hook up to, and just going back, like with us in the stairway, it's 2 hose lines per stairway. Going in the door, if it was like maybe a garden apartment with fire above, we could have a line on the fire floor, and then we could stretch, 2 lines up the stairway above. That wouldn't be horrible, but we just don't like to go more than 2 hose lines in the stairway because it's just a mess to deal with, But with the big thing with the high rise is make sure everybody's on the same page. A lot of times it's going to be that first alarm assignment to get the line into position. And, it could be 4 engines doing 1 line, and then once that line gets into place, they figure out, okay, we're going to stretch his backup line, because maybe the 4 that did it, now 2 will stay together on the fire floor and the other 2 will drop down and they'll stretch that backup line, but it's all going to be based on what they have. And, what happens with us too is the second due engine officer is the water resource officer. So if it's a standpipe job and I'm second due, I'm going to go to the standpipe and make sure that everything's, working before I leave. I'm going to be there, make sure we got the proper water, make sure everything's going good. If I'm the first due, I'm just going to the fire department, trying to locate the fire and have control of the door to make it easy for the guy,
People need to understand that these high rise very, very labor intensive.
Definitely.
And manpower taxing. And as a chief officer, if you've got a good fire going in a high rise, we're going to pull a second alarm. You may not use all those companies, but once you get the elevator, like you said, once water hits the elevator, you're humping it. So, you can't expect your guys to be getting up there and be ready to go. We've run calls, when I was a captain or a lieutenant in Bethesda, where the elevators weren't working, we get up to the 18th floor. We might have to have that next company in, take the lines and get them stretched because we're going to have to take a breather. I'm not afraid to admit it, but, it's very labor intensive. And these are things that the company officers need to be thinking about, as well as the chief officers, knowing that I can't expect, 20 guys to take care of a high-rise fire, especially if it's on an upper floor where you may, in Montgomery, I think it was anything 5 and below, you're taking the stairs. Anyway.
Remember that, Dave,
remember
that, Dave, as the chief officer. You got to give us time to get up there before you start asking us what we're doing and where we're at.
With us, it's 7 7 up, we say, you know.
You're right.
7 floors, you're taking the elevator, you know. I mean, you know what I mean. Yeah.
Yep.
And the other thing too, like you said, as the icing, you got to know your mutual aid and how long it's going to take them to get there. So yeah, you're going to call. It's better to call for them early and have them coming, or maybe they're not coming, and at least, you know, you can have somebody else that's going to come, you know, because it, depending on the time of day, it could be throwing dice whether or not you're going to get a crew out in the volunteer world, you know.
Yep,
At least
absolutely.
in the paid, you know, you're going to have guys, but in volunteer world, you might, it's better to call them, and if you don't need them, cancel them, than to call and somebody's taking 20 minutes and they can't get out, and now you're going to call another department and it's going to take them 40 minutes to get there. That's crazy. You know what I mean? Or even if they get out really quick, maybe it's taking them 10 minutes. That's a half hour. That's a long time, you know? And think about the fire too. The fire's growing in size, you know?
Everybody wants to come to the fire, so invite them. You know, if you don't use them, then you turn them around. But for the most part, at least get them on the road.
Yeah, it doesn't hurt.
No. So anyway, fellas, we're at an hour and 10 minutes of a good conversation, you know, just about getting back to basics and the engine company stuff. But it's the core basics that if we're not doing it and we're not doing it right, then the fire doesn't go out. Like you said in the beginning, Charlie, you know, if the first line doesn't get on the fire, it doesn't matter how great everybody is on the fire ground. If you don't put the fire out, you lose. So engine company work, it's the half of the backbone of the fire service. The other half is good truck work. Those units working together, and you get out and practice. Look at your first two area, and you know, figure out what lines are going to work for you. Make those stretches before the building's on fire, so when it is on fire, it's going to be like second nature. So we'll go around the horn real quick for last words. RJ, last words.
My couple things is stretch daily as much as you can. If you can stretch. It helps with building that muscle memory of how easy or how hard it is going to be in certain areas, turns, that kind of thing. And then the other thing is build your playbook, right? I always resort everything back to football. Football is what I know very, very well, building the playbook. If you have a team, you got to build these plays. And the officer needs to be able to call the play, and everybody knows what the play is going to be. And then how you're going to adjust to the defense. So, you know, the officer says, I want a 200. You know how you're going to stretch that 200. The officer says, you know, I want a 400. You know how you're going to build out that 400. The officer calls the plays, and the members execute the plays. And you adjust to the defense, right? So what happens is something now hampers that 200 from getting in place. How are the players going to adjust on the fly? You know, now you realize you got cars in the way, or these things now were not a part of your original game plan. How are you going to adjust on the fly? So those are my two things: stretch daily, get out, stretch lines, and get comfortable with your lines, and just getting comfortable with moving them, and being able to build a team playbook so everybody knows what the moves are.
Cool, good stuff. Charlie, some last words.
Just remember, it's a team effort. Everything's a team. Everybody works together. Get everybody on the same page. That's big. Have your SOPs for the certain buildings that you go to. If you know you have a high rise, know ahead of time what you're doing. If the high rise, the standpipe's out of operation, how are we going to get water? What could be alternate ways to get the standpipe fed if you needed to, right? Or stretches. The other thing is big is have an SOP for each of your different types of buildings, and know what you're going to do. Know those SOPs, know how to do it. We shouldn't have to, like RJ said, we shouldn't have to tell you, but, you know, we're not micromanaging. If we need you to do a rope stretch out the window, I shouldn't have to tell you exactly how to do it. Hey, we're going to do a rope stretch out the window. And just remember this too, especially department-wise, we all want to be on the same page, because if for that one line fire, we want to look good, stretch the line, whatever fire it is. Because you know what? If engine 1 messes up and engine 2 did a great job, it doesn't matter. Engine 1 and Engine 2 are both from the same fire department, and that whole fire department looks bad. It's not that one company, it's everybody. So we should take pride in our department and try and, build the teamwork so that we can get the job done. Yes, we all want to be first due, but if we're not first due, we don't want to, throw a monkey wrench in the operation. We want to make the operation successful, and we do what we got to do. This way, the next time we have that, if we're first due and the other team second due, we don't have to worry about them trying to jap us out. We can play nice in the sandbox, because at the end of the day, if we don't do that, we're all going to look bad.
Very good.
Charlie hit us with the words of gospel right there. Hey, that's why we need to put that picture up of Charlie with the Jesus.
Yeah. Work on it. Work your magic, okay?
All right. Well, fellas.
Dave, there ain't nothing you need to say. Charlie
Nope.
closed that out.
Charlie closed it out. I'm just saying,
Charlie
thanks for being on here.
Charlie hit us with the
I'll
words
drop
of
the
gospel.
mouse. Drop the mouse.
And with that, we gone. Be safe, guys.
For all your medication and narcotic tracking needs, check out the LogRX app, created by career fire and EMS professionals. That's LogRX.com.
This podcast is brought to you by Flex 7 from TenCate Protective Fabrics. Flexible, comfortable, and powered with the strength of enforced technology. Flex 7 outer shell fabric is made to move. To learn more, visit TenCateFabrics.com/Flex 7.